offline.
I'll say this for him, he's consistent.
Well, he's been so consistent all year.
Not the taste, consistency.
Consistently, yes.
Consistency! Thanks, losers.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Fantasy Football Consistency Show. I am your host, Bob Lung, joined by my illustrious co-host, Mr. Ron Rigney. Ron, how's it going out there?
I think it's the first time I've ever been called illustrious by anyone in my life, so that's awesome.
Even your wife? Your wife doesn't call you illustrious?
No, not so much.
You got to talk to her about that.
I know I do. So yeah, no, doing good here in South Florida. I know that you guys are supposed to be having spring, and are you sitting in some snow right now?
I was this morning. In fact,
Okay.
I came out of my house this morning at 6:45 to go to work, and it was your basic Hallmark card, picturesque snow stuck to everything. The trees, the cars, the houses. It was literally a Hallmark card on my street.
Maybe one last hurrah till maybe finally spring, possibly.
And then when I came out of work today, it was 46 degrees. All the snow is gone. And tomorrow it's supposed to be close to 70 and rain. Welcome to Ohio.
Yes, sir.
And then I think Wednesday goes back to 44.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's how Ohio rolls. It's one of those where you can have your air conditioning and heat on in the same day this time of year.
Yeah, I'm an Indiana kid, so we have that the same thing there as well. On a side note, totally unrelated, but I did want to throw this out there, that I fueled up for this show by had some grilled chicken for dinner, and I think that I grilled the greatest piece of chicken that I have ever grilled in my entire life tonight. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Was it free range?
It was free range. It was not a sweatshop chicken. It was the real deal. And I don't know what I did differently, but it was excellent. So I'm proud of myself tonight. So we're fueled up with some protein. We're ready to rock here with some QBs.
Tonight's the big NCAA tournament finals with the surprising Michigan Wolverines going against the heavily favored Villanova Wildcats. I have Villanova, but and I did win one of my leagues, but there was only 8 people in it, and well, that doesn't count.
Hey, you know what though? In a year like this, though, I'd be happy with any win I could get.
Yeah, I think it was more the fact that I picked some more of the Elite 8 guys. It wasn't like I picked Michigan or Loyola. I think I just did really well in the other side of the brackets, and I think the other people did some risky stuff. But whatever. I'm hoping Villanova just wipes out the team up north because I'm not allowed to talk about them.
That's right.
Because
You're not even allowed
from
to
Ohio.
say their name. Yes.
Honestly, I don't care. I would if Michigan wins, that's great. But I don't think it's going to happen. But regardless, so tonight we're going to talk about QB. So, last week we put together, and if you haven't heard it yet, what I believe is a very nice collection of just introduction information, philosophies, that kind of stuff. If you're new to the consistency world in fantasy football, it's a great listen because it kind of will help you. If you're listening to this show and you haven't listened to the other one and you really have no idea how consistency works, how important it is, or you've thought about it, you've heard about it, you really wanted to try it, that's a great one to start with. Not that you can't come back and listen to this one and all the other ones we've had so far since early this spring or this winter. But tonight we're going to kind of just start looking at the quarterbacks going forward with a little bit of historical data, of course, in it. We've had some awards that we gave to last year's quarterbacks. We've talked a little bit about them. But tonight, I think what we want to do is really break down the quarterbacks heading into this coming fantasy football season. It is a little early. Yes, it's early April here, and the draft has not happened. But we're going to kind of look at quarterbacks as a status quo, assuming that they're not going to get any new wide receivers or running backs, and some will. Not that they usually make that much of an impact, but you never know. But I just don't think that most quarterbacks will have that much of an effect on some of their new rookies coming in on their overall consistency and overall fantasy numbers. So I think what we want to do, Ron, is, we talked about this. We're going to kind of look at the ongoing strategy of how we're going to approach quarterbacks this year. I have a little bit different strategy than I have in the past. But I think, to me, if you're doing this right, you have to change with what's going on. And I think right now the consistency in the quarterback world is down. And I think there's a few elite, and then I don't know if there's a difference. I think there's a big gap between them and the other guys. Not that you can't wait, and you can certainly hold out. And I think we'll talk about some undervalued quarterbacks that we could wait on. But then you have to take that chance of what if you don't get them, and then you're kind of stuck with maybe the bottom of the barrel, and you certainly don't want that in your fantasy league. So, Ron, let's I'm going to start here and just kind of go down the list. We have a ADP list that is coming to us from myfantasyleague.com. Certainly one of my favorite sites for everything, but what they really do well is they collect a lot of data for ADPs. Right now they're running a lot of MFLs, which is basically, I think, best ball type leagues. I think it might be quarterbacks or 6 point per passing touchdown. So I think the ADPs are a little bit high, but I think the order is pretty fair. And so I think we'll just start off with that. So, Ron, let's start with you. What is your kind of, as you're looking towards this fantasy year with quarterbacks, what are you looking at? Any different, any uniqueness in it? Or you kind of have a typical scenario that you go forward with every year?
Well, I think one of the things, too, when we're looking at these ADPs right now this time of year is we're looking at it around the 1st of April. And, everybody's kind of geared towards baseball season, but we're looking at quarterbacks. And I think that when we're looking at it right now, I don't think it's too early to look at it, just because I think a lot of the splashy free agency stuff is going to be over with. Now, that's not to say there might not be, a trade here and there. There could be a salary cap casualty here and there. And, you kind of alluded to as well, anybody that could be brought in far as from a rookie standpoint, if that could change, the quarterback's consistency outlook or not. And I don't think you're going to get a lot of that splashy stuff. I think we've already got that. The dust is kind of settled on the QB carousel, as we call it, in the offseason. And so I think this year, we were kind of alluding to it, we were discussing this a little bit before the show, is based on this ADP and based upon our consistency numbers, and I look at a lot of things here, the top 4 guys are kind of clustered there together, and we're going to get to them specifically here in a little bit, but each one of them has a question mark to me, more so than in years past at that top. And I don't know if there's really that slam dunk guy. I mean, you look at the guys that we take at the top every year. We look at the Aaron Rodgers and we look at the Tom Brady's, and I think that everybody in that top 4 range, based on our ADP list, has something that you have to kind of think about in your head. Are they coming off an injury? Did they lose a key guy? Are they getting new guys in as a supporting cast? Did they lose a lineman here and there? Do they have a strong running game? And so I think there's a lot of things that go into that. But me personally, and I'm kind of all over the board with this, I usually tend to wait on my quarterbacks, and that's usually served me pretty well if I can get a couple kind of in that mid-tier range, kind of depending upon the league size. I know I've alluded to it before. One of my biggest leagues it's a kind of a unique league. It's 8-team divisions, but you're also playing against 95 other teams for the overall as well. So in that one, I can usually get a couple of those mid-tier quarterbacks and kind of rotate best matchups, and that seems to have worked pretty well for me in the past. I can't think of a year where I've gone real early on quarterbacks. Some people will go, very early, like top 3, top 4 pick, first round. I think based upon what we have on this ADP list that we'll talk about here in a second, when I kind of cross-reference it with our 2017 year-end consistency ranks, I'm going to wait till that next tier again. I like some of the values there. I like some of the changes of scenery that those guys have in that mid-tier. A couple guys there that were high on our consistency list, and I think they've either gotten new weapons or they've gotten put into a situation where they all of a sudden have an abundance of weapons around them that they didn't have before. So I think I'm going to hold off a little bit, and kind of like we say, there's 4 guys there kind of clustered together within about 7 picks of each other, and then based on our ADP, you don't see another quarterback going for about 20 more picks. So I'm going to wait maybe until maybe that 7th, 8th round, depending upon the size of the league. But I'm definitely going to wait a little bit, I think, on my quarterbacks, unless somebody just keeps falling down the line and they become an insanely great value.
Yeah, I agree. I always have a man crush on Aaron Rodgers, and that's always a problem for me. I have no problem picking him this year, any year, if I can get him in the 4th, 5th round. It's when it gets into the 3rd rounds is in under. I definitely won't pick a quarterback in the first 2 rounds. Picking Aaron Rodgers in the 3rd round is a little rough for me. I think I've done it when it's a 6 point per 6 point per passing touchdown, and it was like at the end of the 3rd round. So I think what happened was I had like the number 12 pick, so I did a 1-2 flip, and then had the end of 3rd, beginning of 4, and I think I took Rodgers there after getting 2 solid picks at 1-2. And again, I think this year I still will kind of be looking for that. And if he's there, I'll take him. But he's the only player I'm going to take that high. I really love Carson Wentz. If he was 100% healthy heading into this season, and I knew he was going to play all 16 games, I would have no problem getting him in the 4th or 5th round. Beyond that, there's just so many question marks, as you already alluded to, that I just can't take. As much as I saw the numbers and I saw the reality in fantasy with Deshaun Watson in those first 7 games that just blew everybody away, I just don't know if I can count on that happening again. Maybe I'm wrong, and there's probably going to be people that are going to pick him in the 3rd or 4th round. I just don't know if I can do that just because of the small sample size. I got to believe that teams are going to come out and they're going to be a little bit, they're going to do some different things with Watson, after some people, just failed miserably at trying to stop him in those first 6 games last year, or 6 games after he became the starter. They still have Lamar Miller, Donta Foreman, will be back, but that's not a great running game. So if teams really start kind of spying on Watson and keeping him in the pocket and forcing him to be more of a passer, I'm not sure that's his style. That may hurt him. So, again, I'm not sure I'm going to take that chance. Russell Wilson, he's up there too. Again, he started off last year, terribly, and then kind of caught fire, but then didn't do anything at the end. So, like I said, I think right now, if I'm looking at my overall strategy, it's Rodgers either 4th or 5th round, and if not, then I'm just going to wait until some of the undervalued guys, or as you said, that second, maybe not second tier, but I'll call them just undervalued, because if you look at these tiers don't match our tiers, and I just think that I can wait, like you said, for later and get a good solid quarterback maybe in the 6th, 7th, 8th rounds and be loaded up on wide receivers, tight ends, and running backs, and I think we're going to be a lot better off in the long run.
Yeah, I'm looking at our consistency ranks from last year, and we have in that top 4 QB range there where they're all kind of clustered together in that 3rd round. Numbers 1 and 2 on the consistency ranks are right there. And then you have another guy a little bit further down in Russell Wilson, who's right there as well. But the next guy, number 3 on our list, Matt Stafford, you got to go all the way down to pick 77 to find him. And so I think that there's value to be had all around. And then, like I said, there's question marks, there's running game questions, there's wide receiver questions, and so I don't think any of these guys are a slam dunk anymore. And it's one of those things that the drop off is pretty steep, talent-wise as well. And I agree with you in the Aaron Rodgers argument there. He would be the only guy that I would pay up for. But even still, we talked about it a little bit last week with some of the moves and just some of the things overall that they've done with their wide receiver core, and bringing in Jimmy Graham, and the running game still being a big question mark. And so I don't know if it's going to be something where I'm necessarily going to pay up for him as well. So I guess on that note, let's kind of dive into, I guess, looking at the ADPs here and just kind of look at these guys individually. So, like you alluded to, we're using some of the MFL ADPs here, and they shake out pretty much like I would probably rank quarterbacks heading into the season. And so sitting there at the top, quarterback number 1 off the board at pick 29 is the aforementioned Aaron Rodgers. So I guess we kind of mentioned him before as far as where he's at there, but what are some things that I guess that he has going for him that might make you want to step up and use that early pick on him?
Well, I think what we always have to look at with Aaron Rodgers is what Aaron Rodgers does really well is he takes control of the offense when the offense doesn't exist. And the first 5 games last year, he was a perfect 5 for 5. Until he gets hurt, he's perfect in fantasy football last year. Then he went down and came back and then had one more clutch game when he came back for that 1 week. So he was 6 of 7 for the year, but he started off red hot. Why did he start off red hot? Well, because their running game is terrible. Their defense is terrible. They can't stop anybody. They lost their cornerback because they traded him to the Browns. So I got to believe the defense hasn't got much better, which means they're going to be playing from behind or always trying to play catch up. Aaron Rodgers does what he does best, which is throw the ball. And with a running game that is a combination of Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones, it's marginal, but it did a decent job. But I just have to believe that he's still going to need to control that offense and throw the ball a lot. The downfall, he lost Jordy Nelson. Okay, that's not good. But he did pick up Jimmy Graham, which is a good, possession receiver, across the middle kind of guy, which, is basically Jordy in a nutshell. They still have Devontae Adams. They still have Cobb. They still have, Dramino Allison. So they've got some players there that can catch the ball. I'm not too worried about him from his consistency standpoint. In 2016, he was number 1 in, with 435 points, 88% consistency that year. The other year that he was down was 2015 when he was only 56%, but that was the year that Jordy missed the whole season, and that was when he was relying on him a lot. I think he's obviously got to, he's going to get used to that, and that's not going to be around. That's going to hurt a little bit, but I don't think it's going to hurt his consistency just because of what he has to do as a quarterback to keep the Packers in football games. And until they get a better running game, I think he's going to continue to need to throw the ball a lot.
And I think it's worth noting, too, he's been vocal about a couple of moves that the franchise has made as well. He's a little vocal about Jordy Nelson moving on, that, it's no secret that he's his favorite target. But also, it's interesting to see, and, a guy like Aaron Rodgers, you wouldn't think that, where he's at in his career and as great as he is at the position, he would need a lot of one-on-one coaching. But he made it very clear he wasn't real happy about Alex Van Pelt being let go as quarterback coach as well. So we'll kind of see how that translates. I really wonder about the supporting cast. I think Devontae Adams can take that next step. I liked what I saw to him last year. But beyond that, I really wonder, where does Randall Cobb factor into this? What's beyond him? You mentioned the running game. You mentioned the defense as well. And I think that's something, too, that gets kind of overshadowed when we talk about these different positions, especially quarterback, is if your defense is not doing their job, then you're not getting off the field. You're going to be on the field quite a bit. And so I think that's something that definitely needs to be factored in as well. But I don't know, for me personally, if when you look at all that, like I alluded to before, these first 4 guys, each one of them has their own different set of question marks there. And I think he's got a little bit too many questions for me to dive in at that 3rd round range. Now, if you can get him in the 4th, maybe even 5th, I don't know if he'll go that far, but I think I'm definitely more on board in that regard. And so that kind of – oh, go ahead. And so,
go ahead.
And so that kind of leads us to our next guy here, our Super Bowl champ, even though he kind of drove the wagon.
Was sitting on the bench.
Yeah, drove the wagon for the most part, but had to watch the Super Bowl from the sideline. I don't think it's definitely his ideal ending to it, but you can't argue with what Carson Wentz put up last year. And we talked about him, before when we gave out our consistency awards, just how much he took that next step and improved in the season that he had, and he probably would have been MVP had he not had the knee injury, and that's Carson Wentz. So right now on the MFL 10 or the MFL 12 list we got here, pick 33, so he's right there in that cluster, that 3rd round range. So is he a guy that you're going to dive in and use that 3rd round pick on?
Well, again, it all depends on health. Right now, our insider information, who last year led us down the right path when it came to Andrew Luck, is telling us that Wentz is not going to be ready for opening day at this point because of the torn ACL. It happened late in the year, so that makes it a little more difficult. If it happened early in the year, probably a much better chance. So that's the only thing that scares me. If he's 100%, then I don't know about third round. But again, I'd pick him after Rodgers and before just about anybody else. Fourth, fifth round would still be a good value. It might be one of those things where you grab him and then you get a good backup. But my thought is, if he's not ready, there's where could be your value. Because if he's not ready and they're looking at, let's say, week 4 or even week 6, if you can get him later and then maybe do a back-to-back quarterback pick and grab him and Stafford or him and Breeze or him and somebody like that late, that may be your best bet. Then he comes back for the second half of the year. That could be a great value to have at that point. No, he's not going to get drafted at 33 or anywhere near that if he's not going to be playing game 1. Until that happens, I'm staying away from him at that level, but I'm certainly going to watch and see where he's going in drafts as we get closer to the season, and he may be some great value as your backup or your starter. Then grab a solid backup right after that and then keep him stashed until mid-season.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Is something that if you're able to, if you can look at the schedule and kind of get an idea, when we're heading into training camp of what the target week is for him to maybe be back. If you can get an awesome value on him and you can ride out that storm and get a guy that you can start for maybe those first 5-6 weeks and keep you above water, and you've got a guy that was talked about in the MVP conversation last year coming in to be your guy the rest of the way, you can't argue with that. And that's going to be if you can get him. I still think that's a pretty steep price to pay, though, if you're not going to have him those first few weeks in that third round. I almost at this point might feel a little more comfortable taking our next guy here above Carson Wentz just because of the timing of the injury. You spoke to when that knee injury happened to Carson Wentz later on in the season. And the thing about the ACL injuries is it's just amazing what medicine and technology can do and get these guys back on the field 100%. But he's still going to be a little iffy for the start of the season or the first few weeks. So number 3 here, right after Carson Wentz in that ADP, we've got him sitting at the 35th pick off the board, the third quarterback in our ADP here, and that's Deshaun Watson. So we talk about Deshaun Watson. He was actually our number 1 guy consistency wise, and it's funny, we had our number 1 consistency quarterback throwing to our number 1 consistency wide receiver last year as well in DeAndre Hopkins. So on paper it sounds like there's a lot to like there, but what are some reservations that you've got about taking Deshaun Watson in that third round?
Well, again, we have to see if he's 100% healthy. From what I've heard, I think he's certainly on that track and certainly will be at that pace. It's just the fact that when somebody breaks out like that in a rookie season, especially when it's only half of his rookie season, there's no time for the defenses to really properly adjust to how to stop him. After he took over in week 1 and then basically became the starter in week, 2 through 7, he went, he was basically perfect, except for one game. And that was because that was the half of the first game, so he didn't get to put up a clutch game. But in the 6 games he was a starter, he was a perfect 6 or 6. His X consistency number, which you can read about on the site, is literally 5 points higher than Aaron Rodgers. And that's an amazing number to be at 23.5 when Aaron Rodgers is at 19 or 18. It's hard to fathom. I just can't see that continuing. I got to believe that with an average running game at best, Lamar Miller's not bad. He doesn't suck, but he's not great. There's really not, Will Fuller's a decent number 2 wide receiver. I got to believe that teams are going to be a little bit smarter in stopping this offense and maybe focusing more on Deshaun Watson and less on the running game and shutting that down. That doesn't mean he's still not going to put up good numbers. He's still a very active runner. That certainly helps tremendously for quarterbacks in the NFL, especially in fantasy. He's going to be consistency-wise up there. It's just that is he going to be putting up those kind of numbers? I'm going to say no. But I have no problem, and I'll probably certainly have him ranked, in the top at least 5, 6, 7 in quarterbacks because there's so many question marks at all the other quarterbacks that I can't argue that he should be top 5. I mean, outside of maybe Russell Wilson, Yeah. So I don't see any reason why he's not in the top 5. Third round pick, probably not. But again, if he's in the 5th, 6th round, now I might be a little more interested.
The thing I look at with him too is I look at you look at the divisions as well, and I haven't done the complete breakdown of their schedule, but I do like the fact as well that they have Jacksonville, who we know what they did on defense last year. They ranked passing yards per game. They were about 30 below anybody else. But, and I got to pick on my own team here a little bit, he does get to play the Colts twice, and he does get to play the Titans twice, which they were allowing about 240 per game through the air last year, which only ranked them 25th. So they were near the bottom as well. So he gets at least 4 games there where he's going to go against some pretty terrible defenses, because it's going to be hard pressed for me to believe that the Colts can finish above 28th where they finished last year. I think they're going to be a little bit below that because there's some teams behind them that I think it maybe got a little better on defense. And so he gets that as well. But like I said, I got to look at the rest of the schedule there with him. But at the same, I look when the timing of the injuries were, like I alluded to before, and I might be a little more comfortable taking him above Carson Wentz, and this is probably the only time I would ever say that. All things being equal, it's not even close. Carson Wentz is, you could almost make an argument for Carson Wentz being taken ahead of Aaron Rodgers just because of the supporting cast around him. So when we go off of Deshaun Watson here a little bit, we look at a guy that won a Super Bowl a few years back, and the last of these 4 guys here in that 3rd round range with the ADP is Russell Wilson. And so one of the things that I kind of look at with Russell Wilson is that supporting cast is who he's going to be throwing the ball to and who's left town. So how does that affect, when you look at, he's kind of looking at, I know he's got Doug Baldwin, I know he's got Tyler Lockett, but when he looks in the backfield and he's looking down the line there at tight end, he's got a lot of new questionable faces there. So how does that affect Russell Wilson in your eyes as far as being in that 3rd round?
Yeah, Russell Wilson actually had one of his better years. When it comes to consistency, last year he was tied for 4th at 69%. Now, 69% doesn't sound really high, but when it's tied for 4th, it is. And he was 1st in total points. The amazing thing about that is he was 50 points ahead of 2nd place, which was Tom Brady with 351. So Russell Wilson does his fantasy job with his legs. That's got to continue because the running game is still terrible. The offensive line is terrible. You have Doug Baldwin, like you said, Lockett, but now no Jimmy Graham, no Paul Richardson. So they certainly got to get some guys in there that's going to help that. The defense has pretty much been dismantled. So all of a sudden, Russell Wilson is almost in the same boat as Aaron Rodgers, where he's going to have to carry this offense. And he's going to have to make things happen. Now, the problem with that is it also gets your butt injured that way, which Aaron Rodgers found out last year. While I think Russell Wilson will certainly have his high-scoring games, I have to believe his consistency is going to be a little bit rougher, because I just feel like he's got too much pressure to do everything, which forces mistakes, which puts them in a bad situation. I'm a little leery with Wilson this year with now the lack of weapons, but I think he'll still have his good games, his big games, but I also think he's going to have some duds. I think his consistency is going to drop off, which it did. If you remember, just 2 years ago, he was 10th in total points, but he had 44% consistency that year, and he played all 16 games. And he had Jimmy Graham, and he had all those guys. Mm-hmm. So, last year I think, again, his legs did the damage for him. But I'm kind of worried about him heading into this year. I don't know if I'm going to have any shares of him at all, because I just think he's going to be drafted a little bit too high for me.
When I'm looking at the Seahawks depth chart here, when you're looking at tight end, we alluded to Jimmy Graham, and he's not been what he was in New Orleans, but he's still one of the top guys out there. When you have guys on your depth chart named Nick Vannett and Ed Dixon, you got some adjustments to make, and when you're handing the ball off. Now, I will say they've got a few running backs back there that are a little bit intriguing, but still, I don't know if they have that slam dunk guy, and maybe they can mix and match and combine and kind of build like a running back Voltron here and put those guys together and maybe do something. But I think it's worth noting too, when you say Russell Wilson's legs, that doesn't always necessarily mean him tucking it and running either.
No.
You know, he's very good in the regard.
Right.
You know, Big Ben's another guy that even as big and lumbering as he is, he's one of the best that I've ever seen do this as far as extending plays and giving his guys a chance to get open. And Russell Wilson, you know, is 10 times, a million times the athlete, I should say, that Big Ben is, and he's one of the best to do that as well. So we're not always talking about tucking it and running when we say, you know, he's creating plays with his legs too. So
yeah, no doubt about it.
Okay, so that kind of puts, you know, the nice little gift wrap on the third round QBs there. And as I alluded to before, we wait a little while before we see the next one go off the board. And the guy that we have coming off the board next, you know, he's one of those deceptive, sneaky guys as far as when you're comparing consistency with total points. You know, he's a guy that looks pretty good on paper. Looks, you know, you look at the overall body of work last year, you got to kind of look and say, wow, he had a pretty nice year. But when you stack that up with what we've got as far as our consistency ranks, you know, you have to hit the old mouse button here and scroll down a couple times to find him, and that's our consistent favorite of the show, Cam Newton. So I think I kind of already know the answer to this, but are you going to reach for Cam Newton in that 5th round or 6th round there, Bob?
I'm not going to reach for Cam Newton in the 15th round, let alone the 5th or 6th or anything. I wouldn't draft Cam Newton if he was sitting beside me. There's just no way that this guy's going to be on my team. His inconsistency is just devastating. And last year, as we mentioned before, last year has to be a record. Like I said, I was even shocked when I saw that Russell Wilson was ranked 10th a couple years ago and still had a 44% consistency, and I thought that was horrible. But yet Cam Newton went out and is 3rd in total points, and only 3 points ahead of 2nd because he was at 348 versus Tom Brady's 351. So he was that close to being 2nd overall in total points, and yet was 44% consistency. That is less than half of the games he was helping your team from a fantasy standpoint. If you're now sitting there listening and you had Cam Newton on your team and a bell just went off or a light bulb just went off above your head, welcome to the show. You get it. This is what this is all about, is identifying these kind of players. You know, we're going to identify the good ones that are undervalued and, you know, we're good and consistent and can help your team. But more importantly, we want to help you miss these guys, or not miss these guys, miss out on drafting them.
Well, we want to help you. We want to help you miss Cam Newton, though.
Yeah, we want you to miss.
You
Cam
said that
Newton.
correctly. Yeah.
Yes, we want to make sure you miss him in the draft. You know, in his MVP season, when he ranked 1st in total points at 445 points, which is huge at the quarterback. Like I said, last year only one guy was over 400, and that was Russell Wilson. He did it by just 0.75. But that year, he was 69% consistent and was tied for 5th. So in an MVP season, this guy can't be consistent. How in the world do you expect him to be consistent on a normal basis? He has minimal weapons at best around him. You know, they lost Jonathan Stewart, so there goes their power runner. They have Cameron Artis-Payne, who may not be as bad as you think. McCaffrey, you know, Devin Funches, maybe or maybe not healthy Greg Olsen, but we don't know. So that's a hot mess in Carolina. I want nothing to do with that team. Well, maybe McCaffrey, but definitely not Cam Newton.
Well, and I wish, too, that with the running backs, you alluded to Cameron Artis-Payne, and he's a guy, too, that this is, I think, on his 3rd or 4th season there, and I don't really think we've ever gotten enough sample to really know what he is just yet. He's one of those names that's kind of out there that's always buried on the depth chart. And secondly, I wish I'd give the ball to Christian McCaffrey a little bit more. He caught the ball very well last season. As far as PPR, he was a I don't know if I'd say stud, but he was definitely up there as far as PPR backs. But they need to see if he can run between the tackles a little bit. But you mentioned Greg Olsen. I read at one point Greg Olsen was considering going into broadcasting. He was thinking about retiring at one point, coming off the injury, and he came back and he was definitely not himself. And your big splash free agent signing on the offensive side of the ball is Torrey Smith, and I don't know how that necessarily helps you and makes you better. I don't know if the Super Bowl win, upped his value a little bit. I don't really know. You bring in Jarius Wright as well as your wide receiver 3. I just don't see a lot there. And we've talked about Cam Newton too on our awards show, and he's a guy that you sit there and you watch. And he's just a freak athlete, and you look at him as a quarterback, and he'll sit there and he'll make 2 or 3 throws where he's just picking a defense apart, and then you see another one. We talked about Russell Wilson being so good at extending plays with his legs. Cam Newton is the opposite of that. You see him make these great, just pinpoint, just dart throws, and then he goes and he's throwing off his back foot to some guy down the field that's not even close to being on target. So He's a very frustrating player when you draft him in fantasy as well, which to me feeds in perfectly to where you see him ranked so low in consistency. You draft him and you think he's great 1 week and maybe 2 weeks, but then you have 2 or 3 stinkers in there, especially when you need him later on down in your playoff stretch run. So definitely, like I say, one of our all-time favorites on the show, I think, is old Cam. So another guy, as we go a little bit further down, and we got a couple guys, kind of clustered here together as well. Pretty intriguing one here as far as we go into this season, and I think he's kind of limited to the amount of weapons that he has before, but he was also limited at the end of the year last year and put up some extremely solid numbers, and that's our boy Jimmy Garoppolo, who was sent to San Francisco late last season and ended up being one of our top 10 consistent quarterbacks. So how do you feel about him there at pick 57? I got to say I feel a little better about him in the 50s than I do Cam Newton, that's for sure, just a tiny bit.
Yeah, I do. Again, I look at the small sample size, kind of like Deshaun Watson. Garoppolo came in at the end of the year. Was every team playing their hardest, down the stretch, defensively against them? There's just a lot of question marks. I think Garoppolo is going to be a very good quarterback. Having Kyle Shanahan certainly doesn't hurt as your coach. But, they did something in the offseason which I'm not on board with yet, and that was getting rid of Carlos Hyde, even though I was happy for that as a Browns fan. But then bringing in Jerick McKinnon at almost double the price, a smaller back, yes, maybe a little more agile than Hyde, but Hyde still caught 60 balls last year and was a pretty decent back out of the backfield. McKinnon is not, he's not built for 3 downs, but that appears like what they're going to do with him, with Matt Breida spelling him occasionally. The receivers I don't think are bad. I'm assuming Pierre Garçon is going to be there and stick around. He missed the end of the last season, but if he's healthy, you've got Marquise Goodwin, George Kittle at tight end. I think is a pretty underrated tight end. So I think there's some weapons there. In the division they're playing, they're going to have to play the Rams twice, which has a scary defense at this point. One they're building. The Seahawks. Again, depends on how that's all coming apart, but it's not looking good. But that could help. So they've got some defenses are going against that. Certainly he can put up some numbers. 49ers defense isn't all that good, so kind of going back to as we've talked before, teams with bad defenses certainly make the quarterbacks throw a little bit more garbage time stuff. So I think Garoppolo is a top 10. Maybe let's put him top 12. I'm okay with him as a QB1, but definitely not in the 5th, 6th round. If I can get him, more the 8, 9, I'm fine with that. I have a feeling he's going to go much higher, and I'll be like, I'm going to be like on the Shark Tank, and I'm out.
Yeah, he's somebody that I wouldn't hate it if I really, for some reason between now and my drafts, I fell in love with him even more and wanted him at that point. I'd be okay taking him there if he was my guy, but I think if I were picking right now, I think I'm still waiting a little while on my quarterback. But when you look down the list there too, it's another case of when you look at depth, I really hope their top 2 wide receivers stay healthy, because there's not much after Garçon and Marquise Goodwin, who he showed out a little bit last year and had a pretty solid year. And we talked about George Kittle in the tight end episode, guy that I think is a solid candidate as a sleeper tight end, is another one of those freak athletes at tight end. But yeah, Jerick McKinnon is kind of like the wide receiver core. he's about it. And when you look past him, there's not much. So it'd be anxious to see. I'm anxious to see what they do in the draft as far as if they go to try to build up the defense, or they try to maybe add a couple of more pieces to that offensive puzzle there. So we get out of the 50 range, and we wait about 10 picks on our ADP here, and we have a guy that came off the board at the top of the draft a couple of years ago with our guy Carson Wentz that we talked about. Also took a step last year, and that's Jared Goff. And Jared Goff is sitting there as our 7th quarterback out the board, pick 67 overall as far as ADP. And we debated this a little bit in the wide receiver episode, and so we'll kind of start it there as far as another one of your favorites. I don't know if you love him as much as you do Cam Newton, maybe as much as Jay Ajayi, but Sammy Watkins leaving town. Is that going to affect Jared Goff so much that you feel comfortable picking him there, or is that going to sway you at all as far as where you're going to take Jared Goff?
No, I think Jared Goff is going to be a very good quarterback for a very good team. But I don't think he's going to be a very good fantasy quarterback, because I think he is going to be in the same boat. And I think when as I look at the numbers and I've been analyzing Goff and Drew Brees are going to be almost one and the same quarterback based on their situation, not necessarily talent. Drew Brees 10 times more talent, but in the game scenario of where Drew Brees went last year, where they have a very good running game and a very good defense, therefore Drew Brees doesn't have to win football games like Aaron Rodgers has to win football games or Russell Wilson has to win football games. They just have to not lose games. Well, obviously Drew Brees is very good at that, but and when we get to him, we'll certainly break this down a little bit more. But as we've talked in the shows before, Drew Brees was only 50% consistent last year, which is unheard of for him. He was still 10th in total points, but he only had to be 50% consistent because he didn't have to throw that much to win football games, because they have a great duo in running backs and they have a great defense. Well, guess what? Jared Goff's going to be in the same boat. And when you look at last year's numbers, Jared Goff was 12th in total points and was 53% consistent. Now, to me, with the running game that they have, the defense is getting better by the day. Why does Jared Goff have to throw the ball? There's no reason for Jared Goff to be ranked 7th in my mind. And therefore, there's no reason I'm drafting Jared Goff that high, nor am I drafting probably Jared Goff at all for fantasy, because he doesn't need to throw the ball as much or going forward, because until somebody can stop Todd Gurley, and that doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon, Jared Goff isn't going to be a great fantasy quarterback, and that's the way I'm looking at him heading into this year.
What I ultimately thought of, and I don't know, I think he'll be a little bit better than this as far as from a fantasy standpoint, but Bob, I like the fact that you pointed out, he's going to be a really good real-life quarterback on a really good team, but he may not be your fantasy stud that you want there. To me, I kind of thought of those Ravens teams that went to the Super Bowl and won the Super Bowl. They had that awesome defense, and I don't know this Rams defense is going to be awfully good as I look at this depth chart. I don't know if they're going to be on the level of those defenses with the Hall of Famers that they had, but they have the potential to be amazing. Right. And like you said, if you don't have to throw it, the old adage, you throw the ball, 3 things can happen, 2 of them are bad. Right. Why would you do it? Right. So I think if you don't have to, you're not going to. And so that can affect those wideouts a little bit as well, as far as the chances that they're going to get. But I think he'll be a little bit better than, more than a game manager. But I don't know if he's going to play to justify being the 7th quarterback off the board, especially when some of these other guys we're going to get to are still sitting there if this ADP shakes out the way it's going to shake out.
Let me throw out some other consistency numbers on Goff and another reason why. So last year he was 8 out of 15 in clutch games, so 53%. 8 out of 15. However, he was only 2 for 7 over the last 7 games of the season. Because basically, once Gurley was on a roll, he definitely didn't have to throw the ball. So he earned 6 out of those in the first, 8 weeks or 9 weeks. And then once things were clicking offensively, there was no reason for him to be involved that much, and was 2 for 7 over the second half of the year. So that's another thing to kind of kind of hits me across the face. Like, Goff just doesn't jump out to me as a guy that's a QB1 in my mind.
And honestly, you don't want to wish an injury on anybody, but I think the best thing that could ever happen to Jared Goff from a fantasy standpoint is if Todd Gurley were to get injured.
Yeah, but they have no running game at all.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Exactly. So it might give him more chances in that regard. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. Is it going to help him or not? So next guy off the board, a guy that's very near and dear to my heart, that I don't really know if anybody really knows the full story on him, including himself, and that's Andrew Luck. Jim Irsay has come out and kind of talked a little bit, and of course it's all smoke and mirrors, and they're happy with where his development's at, and he's going to be fine, and he's got 10 more years to come, and I hope that they're all correct in that assumption, because I've not seen a lot that really leads me to believe that there is a lot of positive things going on. But I'm also I'm not Dr. James Andrews. I'm not a sports medicine doctor. I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I don't know necessarily what's going on.
And you didn't play one on TV.
No, I don't. I've never even played one on TV or on a podcast either. So,
okay.
When I just want to know what's going on, and it's one of those things. I understand why they're doing it. The Patriots, I think, are the best at kind of not telling you anything that they don't want you to know, which is really nothing. And so We'll see what happens there. But Andrew Luck's the next guy coming off the board as the 8th quarterback. And once again, I love my Colts. I love Andrew Luck, but you got to draft with your head, not your heart. And I look at some of the guys behind him. And if I can get him at a value and kind of stash him, maybe, or if it's a fun league, and there's not a lot on the line, I might say, what the hell, and I might draft my guy. But at the end of the day, when I'm looking at him at that ADP, man, I'm a little scared if I had to feel like I had to get him at that pick 72. So what say you, Bob, on my boy Andrew Luck?
Well, I went back to our source that helped us through last year, and I asked him what he knew, and his comment to me was, yes, he is throwing. However, there is many rumors coming from that area that he will not be the same quarterback. He will not have the same arm strength. And there is still talk that if it doesn't get better, if he can't improve, his career could be over within a year or so. Because of that, I'm still under the conspiracy theory that the Colts are going to draft a quarterback this year, and I realize that they moved back, right? They moved back to 6 with the Jets trade, right?
Yep.
But I still think that they are going to draft one of those guys, whether it's Baker Mayfield or somebody like that. If one of those 4 quarterbacks or 5 quarterbacks slipped to number 6, I have a feeling they draft. And if they do draft a quarterback, then I think we know our answer. At this point, I'm not touching Andrew Luck with a 10-foot pole. I don't care where his ADP is. Until somebody shows me video of him throwing some bullets with the football, that ain't happening on my team. There are too many other quarterbacks that I'll take a chance on. I'll draft Phillip Rivers at this point at any ADP before I'm going to draft Andrew Luck, until I know for sure that is a healthy quarterback that's going to take the field this year.
Yeah, it's scary to think that, because that's the first, and I've read a couple things about that, but it's crazy to think that could happen. But at the same time, they're sitting at a good spot with that pick, and there's a lot of things that they could do with it. Either way, I think at 6, it makes sense for them to get those extra picks, and also they're going to be able to get a guy that could be a franchise player as well. But I can't wait to read the columns in the Indianapolis Star the next day if they do end up taking the quarterback. So that's going to be fun to read, even as a Colts fan, with all the different conspiracy theories and whatnot. So, and once again, too, you look at the defense, and I alluded to it before we talked about Deshaun Watson. I understand the direction they're going in, and I like some of the pieces that they put there, but it's a young defense. They're rebuilding the entire thing from the ground up to fit the turf a little bit better. Offensively, even if Andrew Luck is back, I like T.Y. Hilton a lot. The line is still they've added pieces to the line, but the line is still a question mark because they've had injuries. Ryan Kelly was hurt most of last year. Jack Mewhort, I think, was hurt most of off and on last year, if not the most of last year. I'm trying to remember. Their season was a big disappointing blur, so it's hard to kind of remember what went on there. But
the other thing too is, let's say Andrew Luck miraculously is 100% healthy. His starting running back is Marlon Mack, and his number 2 wide receiver is Ryan Grant. If that doesn't scare you, I don't care how healthy Andrew Luck is. Yep. Yeah. That's some trouble.
Well, and you talk about quarterbacks that can make people around them better, but you can only do so much with, and another old saying that I like too is you can't make chicken salad out of chicken crap, and so it's tough to do. It's tough to do, man. And some of those guys can only do so much, and so anyway, I'll stop crying about my Colts. Not much to expect there. But we'll finally get to a guy that I absolutely love heading into this season. I liked him going into last season, and the thing about him is he had even less weapons heading into last year than he does this year. A guy that's changed scenarios here, changed addresses, I think for the better. And he's sitting here as our 9th quarterback off the board, a couple spots after Andrew Luck, which is strange to me because I would take him before Andrew Luck all day long, and I would have last year as well. And that's Kirk Cousins. And he's sitting here, the move to Minnesota, the move to a different division. He kind of finds himself with an abundance of solid receivers around him, and some people, not a solid tight end. Not that he didn't have that. Key is he's Kyle Rudolph's more healthy, more consistent than our guy Jordan Reed there. So what do you say about Kirk Cousins there at pick 74?
Well, outside of Aaron Rodgers, there isn't too much of a bigger man crush than me and Kirk Cousins, as you know over the last couple of years. When a few years ago I was writing in the book in my fantasy football guide that Kirk Cousins was going to be my quarterback in 2016 after he had a solid end of the year of 15, and he just went out and was tied for 6th in fantasy consistency, 5th in total points, and and a really good ADP that year. If this is true, and I'm really doubting this ADP here, I have to believe. I mean, right now, if I'm ranking quarterbacks, Kirk Cousins is in my top 5. You know that. Yeah. Because, again, he was 5th in total points last year with a terrible cast around him. Now, his consistency suffered because it went down to 56%, which is tied for 11th, so he's still a QB1. I have a feeling that at worst, he's going to get back to the 2016 numbers, where he was 70% consistent, top 5 in consistency, top 5 in total points. If I can get him in the 7th, 8th round, holy cow, is my team going to kick some ass. But I just don't know if that's going to happen. If he comes out preseason and that team looks good in preseason and he's clicking with everybody, I have a feeling he's going to jump up real fast into that top 7, top 5, which, again, ADP-wise may put him in the 5th, 6th round, which, again, depending on where the rest of these guys are going. But, in a typical league where people are waiting, I can see Cousins kind of falling back. Again, nobody really has caught on to Cousins being a good value and a good consistent player. Kirk Cousins is kind of like the Jarvis Landry at quarterback. Every year he just puts up numbers, and every year he gets disrespected. That's fine with me. I'll pick him all day long, and he's definitely one of my probably top 3 favorite picks value-wise heading into this year. And if I miss out on Rodgers in the 5th, and he goes, in the 3rd, and I just don't take him that early, then there's no question in my mind that I'm holding out to see where Cousins is going to fall. Again, I don't know if it's going to be number 75 overall. I have a feeling he's going to go a little sooner than that, but it'd still be worth it to me if I could get him in the 6th round.
I can definitely see him as a Rodney Dangerfield of quarterbacks here, as far as and I look at the guys up, from about number 3 down to number 9 where he's at on this ADP, and I think it's really easy to put him in the top 5 there above Cam Newton, and I'd put him above Russell Wilson too. I don't know how you feel about that as well, but I think I'd put him at 4.
I think if, again, it depends on the value. I mean, if we're just putting them in order, I would probably put him ahead of Russell. I think I would. And like I said, if Wentz is going to start the season, that means he's not going to go in the top 3. So, hell, Aaron Rodgers, it could go Aaron Rodgers and Cousins and Deshaun Watson at this point. And I wouldn't even flinch at doing that at this point.
I don't think I'm paying up for Kirk Cousins at pick 33, though. Like
not at pick 33, but if I'm putting them in order,
no
not
doubt.
ADP-wise, but in order
Yep.
of fantasy value, fantasy, of success on the field, I'm putting him definitely top 3. Maybe I put Watson in front of him just because of what he did, but again, and with Wentz being injured, et cetera, and all the kind of stuff that goes along with that, I can't argue putting him at least top 3 or 4.
And he's one on this list too that I can't wait to see as far as when we get closer to the season how that ADP changes, because I don't think it's like you said, it's definitely not going to stay at 74. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So as we move on here, we'll get to number 10 here, and this is our boy here, the timeless, ageless wonder, who continues to do it year in and year out, no matter who the supporting cast is. He always has a stable of about 15 running backs to throw to out of the backfield. He's always got different shifty possession wide receivers to throw to, and love him or hate him, you got to respect what the guy does, and that's Tom Brady. And you mentioned him before. He's our number 10 consistent quarterback, but he's another one of those guys that kind of fools you a little bit because he looks a little bit better on paper, and he's at 63%, not terrible, not great. But he was number 2 in points overall. So Tom Brady here at number 10, you think he stays there, higher, lower? What do you think?
I'm surprised he's that low. I have a feeling that on name alone, he'll get drafted in the top 7 quarterbacks. I don't think he'll be that far down. I just don't see it. Because again, when you think about the average fantasy football league, not the ones we play in where we got a lot of experts and high profile type people, but in a typical, everybody brings their, gets their 6-pack and their fantasy football magazine to the same place on the way to the draft. People aren't going to let Tom Brady fall that far on name alone. One, they're probably not paying attention to consistency, so they see the number 2 ranking in fantasy points, and they're gonna draft him in the top 5 quarterbacks. I'll guarantee it. So, again, I want to see where he goes, where his ADP really falls out. I think I think this year with his consistency, especially the fact that his consistency really wore down at the end of the year. I mean, he went 1 for 4 during the playoffs. Weeks 13, 14, 15, 16, he only had 1 clutch game, and that was week 16. And so, he kind of not slacked off, but kind of just, kind of faded off a little bit at the end of the year. And I'm wondering if, age has to catch up to this guy at some point. And I'm wondering if, this next upcoming year where, we're looking at Rex Burkhead as the starting quarterback. Deion Lewis has moved on. They will get Edelman back, which is nice. You'll have Cooks. I think he'll still be top 5 in scoring, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that 63%, 65% consistency stay there, which doesn't give me a warm fuzzy about drafting him too high, and I think he'll just go higher than I want to pay for him, and for that reason I'm out.
Yeah, I agree, and you name value alone, like you said too, and I think that even you talked about the leagues that we play with, some people around the industry. I think name value kind of creeps into those a little more than you think too, and I think that, but at the same time, I mean, he's done it for so long. He's been great at a high level year in, year out, and he continues to do it, and he hasn't really shown a whole lot of drop off. Like you said, he that 63%. I think it's pretty safe to say we're going to see him right around there as well, as like you alluded to. So next guy on the list here is a guy that I like as far as the value, and he's one of the ones that, when you look at the ADP on this list and you look at our consistency rankings for last year, one of the bigger discrepancies as far as the number of spots between them, and that's Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford finished 6th in total points, but he finished as our number 3 consistent quarterback overall with 75%, played in all 16 games, just looked solid and looked like, I think in our awards show that we did a few weeks ago. He was one that was discussed a lot because it's kind of like you squeeze the most value out of him as far as where you got him at. So what are you thinking as far as him here at pick 77?
At pick 77, I'm perfectly fine with. I've really looked at Stafford as I've been putting together the profiles for the quarterbacks for the upcoming magazine this year, and I kept trying to figure out reasons why he would go back to being the Matthew Stafford of old, which is a good quarterback, but not a great fantasy quarterback. He always was, top 12 in scoring, and that's never been an issue for him. In fact, over the last 3 years, last year he was 6th, the year before he was 7th, the year before that he was 8th. So you're like, okay, this guy's a very consistent quarterback in total points, and he is. I mean, you can count on pretty much if Matthew Stafford plays all 16 games, he is going to easily be a top 10 fantasy scoring quarterback. The problem has been, until this past year, that he's also very inconsistent. So last year he was ranked 3rd, and actually if you take out Deshaun Watson and Rodgers, who only played 7 games, he actually was the number 1 highest ranked fantasy consistent quarterback. But just 2 years ago, when he was ranked 7th in total points and actually only scored 3 less points than he did in 17, he was tied for 13th at 50%, and the year before that he was 16th. So again, he was more of the game manager and played game, kind of did what he had to do to, stay in football games. Obviously, that team hasn't changed much. So other than losing Eric Ebron, which may be a blessing in disguise, they still have Golden Tate. They'll still have Marvin Jones.
You're welcome, Detroit.
Yes, thank you. They'll still have Galladay. They'll still have Theo Riddick. They still have who's their other running back?
They had a LeGarrette Blount too in the backfield.
Oh, that's true. They did that. They did get So they got LeGarrette Blount. So they got a power back now. They have Riddick and Abdullah. So nothing's really changed offensively for him. So I don't see any reason why he can't be the same guy he's been. If his consistency stays up, that's even more of a bonus. And based on his ADP, if I could draft Kirk Cousins and Matthew Stafford as my backup, I'm golden. If one of them goes down, the other one can fill in just fine. And honestly, last year, I think I drafted Stafford in a lot of leagues as my backup and ended up, he became my starter. In fact, the Flex League, he took me to the semifinals, and I had Deshaun Watson in that league. So when Watson went down, I had to rely on Stafford for the whole year. So it was a blessing in disguise there, but I think he's a great QB. If you can get him as your backup, I think I'm actually surprised he's ranked 11th. I'm assuming people are looking at the total points ranking, but I think I think he's definitely a very good backup. So, but I have a feeling that we have kind of run out of time, and so my thought is this has went very well, but I think we have a lot of quarterbacks to talk about that also provide some good value. So. What do you say we just do a part 2 next week and keep talking about quarterbacks? You good with that?
I like it. I was going to say there's a lot of names
here. There's a lot of names to get
in
to.
this next list of ADPs that I'd really like to talk about here. And you got some rookies here sprinkled in as well, so that could be some intriguing conversation also.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, hey, great week, and thanks everybody for listening. And you are listening to the Fantasy Football Consistency Show with myself, Bob Lung from Big Guy Fantasy Sports, and Rod Rigney from there as well. Ron, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and what you got going on in some of your other places?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at @TheRealMade. You can find me, here every week talking the consistency angle as we get ready to put the guide out again, doing the write-ups for that. You can find me in full baseball mode right now. The 2 podcasts we have going on every week. Fantrax Dynasty Baseball with my guys Nathan Dockett and Van Lee, and also the Fantasy Baseball Nasty Cast with the same 2 aforementioned handsome gentlemen as well. Oof. And so last thing, with baseball in full swing, Fantastics going full bore over there as far as doing the different player analyses every week. I'll be there again, breaking down what happens this Thursday in the AL, and that you'll be able to check me out over there on Friday. See who did what in the world of Major League Baseball. I might even give you a couple of maybe hopefully successful DFS plays as well. So that's where you can check me out at.
All right. Well, thank you, Ron, for that. And as usual, you can find me at Big Guy Fantasy Sports with all the consistency articles up there now. We're, like I said, we'll be adding the podcast, of course, and some other great stuff coming up. I know, baseball-wise, the closer report by our boy Colby Conway will be going up this week as well. So lots of great stuff there, and you can find me on Twitter at Bob_Lung. Once again, thanks again, everybody, for following along, and don't forget to check in next week as we break down the second portion of quarterbacks on Quarterbacks Part 2. So everybody have a great week. God bless and take care.